give you a little more information about myself and the consulting team. I want you to come away from this meeting having a good understanding of what hazard mitigation is and what is a hazard mitigation plan. And I could add on to that why you have the plan. And we'll talk a bit about who's developed the plan. Contributed to it at least. We'll review natural hazards and critical facilities that may hazards that can impact you, as well as facilities that you rely upon. We'll talk specifically about your goals and some mitigation actions. Those are these projects that you want to do. And then I'll give you some information about how you can review the draft plan, which is not quite ready, but we're close. And you can interrupt me and ask questions as you like. So just to give you a sense of the consulting team, there are sort of four primary people. I'm the lead for the effort. It's my firm that has the contract with the state to update your plan. Bill, Darren, and David have participated through the entire process as well. And we are under contract to work with a number of communities in the state. The initial contract gave us 14 towns, and the state has given us 6 more and intends to give a total of 17 new ones, I guess. So I don't know, be well about 30 plans that we'll update on behalf of the state. And then there's some other communities in the state that we've worked with independently. But we do have hazard mitigation nationwide. We write these plans throughout the country, including as far away as the territory of American Samoa and the county of Maui. So our experience is pretty vast. The 4 of us are all small business owners. And for me personally, I like to keep my business small. And for each project that I take on, I really like to pick who's going to work with me. And these guys have a tremendous amount of expertise. So we're doing a good job, I think. All right. So I thought I'd kick it off with seeing if, just to get you engaged a little bit, my question, which is a little bit silly, I guess, is would you rather be hot or cold? Because, you know, when we talk about hazards, we think about extreme temperatures. What do you think, Judith? Hot or cold?
I'd rather be cold because I know how to deal with it.
I agree with you. You can kind of manage cold. Anybody else thoughts? Hot or cold?
Definitely cold here.
Yeah.
It's more manageable and you can always layer up.
It's true. So one thing that's come up in our planning process is that Hardwick Elementary School, which can be used as what we would call a heating or cooling center, or it could even be a bit of a shelter, they don't have air conditioning in that facility. So that's the kind of thing that we look for when we're writing our hazard mitigation plan, is sort of what is the town's capacity to mitigate risk. And if you're too hot or too cold, that is a risk, especially to vulnerable populations, right? So if we're talking about elderly folks or people with disabilities, we need to be nice temperate climate, right? So that's the kind of thing that we look for. And then we develop maps like what's on the screen. And I know it's very small, you can't really see it, but this is what we call your base map. And it's in the plan, and you'll see it when you get a chance to look at the plan. All right, so let's talk about what hazard mitigation is. FEMA technically says it's any action that you can take to reduce or eliminate risk to people and property from natural hazards and their effects. So we focus only on natural hazards. We don't talk about terrorism or anything like that. And we're trying to understand all of the different natural hazards and what their impact may be, and then based on that, what we could do about it so that you don't have a disaster. And it's been proven that for every dollar you spend mitigating risk, lessening that impact, if you will, you save approximately $6 on future disaster losses or future costs. Not to mention you can save lives, right? So if you, for example, don't fix a culvert, those things at the side of the road that let water flow through, if you let that culvert get blocked up and it blows out and the road goes out, then not only does that impact people driving and getting to work, but if there's an economic impact, there could also be a real, there could be injuries or other life impacting conditions from a road blowing out, and it's going to cost exponentially more if you wait for that disaster to happen. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at identifying as what can happen and what you can do about it ahead of time. So in your plan, and this is the second public meeting that we've had, so we give the public 3 opportunities to participate in our planning process, 2 meetings like this one, and then the chance to review and comment on the draft plan. Now, something that you should be aware of is that the plans get approved by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They then get adopted by the town. And as Eric mentioned in his introduction, the town needs to adopt the plan every 5 years. So you need to update and adopt the plan every 5 years. When you do have a plan approved by FEMA and adopted by the town, it's good for 5 years, and the town is eligible for what we call pre-disaster mitigation funding. So that's the big motivation for people writing these plans or towns having these plans, is that without them, you're not eligible for a significant amount of grant funding. So we're really looking for projects that you might seek funding for. In your plan, the plan starts with what we call a community profile. It sets the stage. What is Hardwick? Who's there? What's your built environment like? What's the natural environment like? We really just like to get a big picture. And then we look at all the types of hazards that can impact the town, and we do what we call a risk assessment. And I'll explain that to you a bit more, but we're really looking at the impacts. Then we look at your capabilities, your capacity to mitigate risk. For instance, you're a small town with limited staff. So that could be seen as a challenge that you don't have lots and lots of, staff people. At the same time, it's kind of a benefit in the sense that you can work well together. You know what's going on. So we look at that. And then the mitigation strategy is the chapter of the plan that talks about those actions that you want to implement over the next 5 years. That's the what you're going to do about it portion. And then the final chapter will show you how to implement the plan and maintain it. Everything that's in the plan, it's all written in a way that is clear and easy to understand, and it has to meet certain federal requirements. So we really try and spell it out for FEMA that what they want to see is in fact in the plan. All right. Any questions so far? So we started our process back in September with a kickoff meeting, and by April, we will be able to send the plan to the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. That's what MEMA stands for. That's our plan. After MEMA reviews your plan, it will go to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for their review and approval. When FEMA is comfortable that the plan has met the Code of Federal Regulations, so all requirements are met, they'll send a letter to Eric and to the town that says that the plan is approved pending adoption. And it's at that time that the town select board needs to formally adopt the plan. And as the head of the consulting team, I'll work with Eric through that entire process. Looking at this timeline, what you should notice is that top line really talks about how we engage with you and the town through our entire planning process. So no matter what we're doing, whether we're, collecting data or updating your risk assessment or coming up with these actions, we've included the town through the process. All right. When we first develop a plan, the first thing we do, since this is a plan update, is we look to your previous plan, which was written by the Regional Planning Commission in 2019. And that plan, we need to let FEMA know, based on that plan, what's different now, what's changed. For instance, suppose you put in a mall or something, or you had a new subdivision, or you implemented all your mitigation actions, or you didn't implement them. So we give an update to what's going on. We also look to the state's plan. It's a federal requirement that all local plans be consistent with the state's plan. And then we look to what's called your Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Plan. Some of you probably participated in that process to develop that. And since it's fairly new, it was really useful towards putting together this new plan. And then the cover of your plan, which in fact looks slightly different than this slide, basically, we look at these three, we come up with the new one, plus all of the involvement with the community. And one of the best ways for us to involve the community is we put together a hazard mitigation planning committee. So in addition to the kickoff meeting, we've had or will have 4 hazard mitigation planning committee meetings. This is a list of some of the folks who are on the committee. And it has been their responsibility to provide the consulting team with supporting data and information. And we really inundated them with questions and surveys in the beginning of our planning process. And Eric and Sandy, who's not here, can attest to that. And we then tasked them with outreach and support to stakeholder engagement. So the fact that you all know about this meeting is because the committee did some outreach. We provided a press release and a flyer, but they did the work to get the word out. Pardon me. And then we asked them to assist with identifying and prioritizing your list of hazard mitigation actions. And they'll review and comment on the draft plan before it's available for public review. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. So when we look at the risk assessment, what we're trying to do is understand where hazards and community intersect and come up with a level of risk. So the first thing we do is come up with a long list of hazards, everything we can think of that could impact the town. And again, we're looking to your previous plan and to the state plan to help with that list. And then we're also looking at the community and what's there. Like I mentioned, the first beginning part of your plan is that planning area profile, which talks about the population and some demographics, the built environment, your natural environment, and the economy. So this is our list of hazards. We did lump hot and cold together into extreme temperatures. And I think you can see that it's a fairly comprehensive list. What's not listed here but is included in your plan is climate change. So we look at climate change not as a hazard by itself, but we look at how it impacts all of these hazards. And except for earthquakes, it does impact all of them. So we want to pay close attention to that, because when we write your plan, we're not just looking backwards or at today, but we also want to look into the future to what do we expect to happen. And does this feel to everyone like a pretty comprehensive list? Is anybody concerned there's something missing?
Well, human health isn't in there.
Right. So human health is not listed as a hazard, but we talk about it in the plan in terms of how these hazards impact human health. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
but that's implied and it's not stated. That bothers me.
okay, yeah, that's a good point. I'm just making a note. I think that you'll see in the plan that it's stated, but if it's not stated adequately, when you review the plan, I want you to let me know.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, I want you all to be comfortable with the plan. All right, so when we look at hazard profiles, we start off with a description. Oh, I'm sorry, you had a question. Go ahead.
Okay. In that previous slide you had there, my name is Sky. The question I had was, where would groundwater contamination be in this list of squares here?
Yeah, groundwater contamination is going to be. I'm just making a note that you're asking that because I like to capture everything. It's going to be included in flooding, invasive species, and other things like severe weather or severe storms. So we are going to cover groundwater contamination, but we didn't hold it as a hazard just by itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
Another one is the effect of man-made molecules on nature.
Can you explain it
differently? But man, since World War I, mostly World War II, has invented many molecules that don't exist in nature. Like, and Rachel Carson brought that up. The fluorinated hydrocarbons and things like that. Those were inventions of humans, not nature.
Right. And we really focus only on the nature.
Okay.
And that is a federal requirement that we include all possible natural hazards. It's not a requirement that we omit the others, but FEMA doesn't review that. And typically you'd find things like hazardous materials, which I think some of those molecules that you're talking about could fall into that, could have a plan unto itself.
Yeah.
That being said, sometimes we do sort of hold out different facilities that may have hazardous materials in them because, for instance, in a disaster with some of these hazards, those facilities may be impacted and, there'd be that ripple effect.
Yes, I get you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to keep us going a little bit. So with the hazard profiles, each hazard has a section of the plan. It starts out with a very basic description.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I muted you, Judith, so you don't have to worry about your phone. So we give a basic description, then we describe where the hazard may occur. Some of those hazards are what we would consider to be atmospheric, right? Things like extreme temperatures. Almost equally through your town, everybody will be equally hot or cold, right? Like the temperature will be about the same. Whereas things like flooding are going to be only in specific areas. So we try to identify that. We look to previous occurrences, what's happened in the past, and for a plan update, we can bring forward what was in the last plan and really focus on over the last 5 years what's occurred. We look at what we call extent, which is the range of what's possible, basically. So if you think about an earthquake, for instance, you can have little earthquakes to maybe medium-sized earthquakes, but you're not going to have earthquakes like what we would see necessarily in California. We also think about the probability of future events, right? Are we going to have drought next year? Maybe. Are we going to have a winter storm? Guaranteed. Are we going to have a heat wave this coming summer? Almost definitely, right? So we try and understand that. And then the vulnerability, that's where we begin to look at that interaction of these hazards with the environment, whether that be people, buildings, your economy, the natural environment. We want to see how there's an impact there. All right. When we talk about community assets, we think in these 4 categories, and I wanted to give a chance for all of you if there was something you wanted to say about your community, whether it's the population, the natural environment, something that really stands out to you that you think is especially relevant in what we're talking about. As we look at how these hazards impact all of these areas.
I don't know if this falls into any of these categories, but I'm concerned with pollinating bugs and other useful bugs, insects for our food sources. And does that fall into any of these categories?
I think it can fall into those categories with the natural environment, and certainly if we don't support your having these natural areas, then you're not going to have the bugs and the food sources, right?
Right. And
so, yeah, and for me, in terms of with my mitigation planning hat, I think about ways to protect the natural environment, which could be something like zoning regulations, right? You can't, you don't want to build in a wetland, for instance. You want to leave it, that kind of thing. That's a really good comment. Other thoughts about this?
I think topography.
Mm-hmm. And you want to say more about it?
Yeah. Well, the town has a very rocky soil, and my personal observation is that our local streams tend to be very sensitive to heavy rainfall. So they rise rather quickly when we experience large thunderstorms and such. So I think that a large portion of the town is over 1,000 feet in elevation. So I think that having a lot of highlands can cause a lot of the streams to run off rather quickly.
So you can get sort of flash floods.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would say, based on climate and what we're seeing today, as well as what we anticipate, we're seeing more of that. These sudden, real bursts of heavy rain. I think we have that in a way that we didn't used to.
Right.
All right. Anybody else with some thoughts? Go for it. Oh, let me unmute. You just have to unmute, Judith. Let's see, did she get it?
Okay. Yeah.
There you go. We can hear you. Go ahead.
I can't remember what I was going to say. It's about the environment well. There's a whole concept about it. I've lost the exact point I wanted to make, but
we can come back to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
The environment is our life support.
Right.
This is our oxygen, our water, our soil, which produces our food, which shelters us,
right,
and includes shade and so on. And the point I'm worried about is how man's interventions alter our environment drastically and don't take into consideration that what they're altering has indeed provided us, well, for instance, when you cut trees, you're taking away coolness and the ability for the natural environment to cool the earth in a time of global heating. So I don't know how you put that down, but
that's a good point, and it's something that does come up, and I can tell you, since I've been doing hazard mitigation for at least 25 years, we used to think about cutting trees because we wanted to prevent trees falling and taking out power lines. And now we talk a lot, not just about making sure that trees don't impact power lines, but planting trees because they're providing shade. And how can we protect trees from invasive species because of some of these health benefits that we have. So I think you see both in the hazard mitigation plan, which is good.
Great.
All right, I'm going to keep going. We've identified these as what we would refer to as your critical facilities. So I think if I asked you about your critical facilities, you would quickly say, fire station, town hall, police, that kind of thing. But we also look to your infrastructure. So we're thinking about water, wastewater. We've got the libraries listed here. The seniors. You don't have a senior center.
You don't have a senior center.
I was going to say you don't have a senior center. That's a mistake. Used to have a senior center.
Yeah, we used to have one.
When did it go? Get taken away?
Probably 10 years ago, it was shut down.
Okay. Good for me to know. All right. And then the schools are listed. Because again, we want to point out which buildings are most important to the town, sort of before, during, and after a hazard event.
Can you list churches?
We can list churches. Yes, when you make a critical facility list, the town can list whatever they want. So that's something that we can certainly consider. All right.
Yeah, we have about 4 of them, or 5 maybe.
Okay. It tends to be hard to identify all of them, and you end up a little bit at risk of omitting some. And typically we can list it whatever you want, but typically we don't list them unless they're playing a specific role in emergency management.
For instance, one list houses the food pantry, so there's access to food.
Right, that's good. Cool. All right, we can certainly consider that. So what we do with your list is we want to map as much as we can each hazard, and this is just an example of us mapping the flood risk and your built environment. We can, it's not on this map, but we have data for all of the buildings in town. And you can see here, we see that approximately 23 single-family homes are exposed to flood. Obviously, a number of culverts and roads. And then we get an estimated loss. So if you had a flood, this is just it's a big estimate because this is if the whole town floods at the exact same time, which is obviously not what happens. It's possible, but that's just how the modeling works. But this is the kind of thing that you'll see in the plan, and the legend is small, but you can see that we call attention to what we feel are the critical facilities. All right, and then I wanted to show you the wildfire risk as well. Again, it's not super high, but we do look at which people, buildings, roads, etc. can be at risk.
Not wildlife.
No, not wildlife. You're right.
Why not?
I've never seen that in a hazard mitigation plan. That's a good question.
A loss. That's a big loss.
Yeah, it is.
Wildfire.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never seen a plan call a lot of attention to in the profile what's there. For instance, we would in our profile we would say, here are forested areas, etc., but not. We talk about trees, but we don't typically say too much about animals.
Yeah, well,
It's something to consider.
So easy to do that now because we have all the data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what maps or graphics you're using, because there's a new one I recommend that we use, the EJ Environmental Justice Maps.
That's in your plan. The environmental justice maps are in your plan because we make a big point to make sure that, for instance, like in Gilbertville, there might be some lower income compared to some other places in the community, and we want to make sure that we're emphasizing mitigating risk to those communities. So that is in there. I'm glad you mentioned.
So my point would be in this discussion about like the animals or other wildlife species, you could just layer that too, because those are resources that contribute to overall productivity
We're all up when we have.
of the environment.
I don't think we're muted.
Yep.
No, 'cause you're out.
I'll mention it tomorrow morning to Bill, who does the risk analysis on our team, and we'll have a conversation about that, Judith. I'll let you know what we figure out. And somebody asked in the chat about ambulance, and yes, we do include that as a resource. So that's a good question. So what we did, is come up with, this is your list of hazards, and we look at, we put them into buckets basically of high, medium, or moderate, and low. And this is your risk. And remember, I showed you that graphic where we took the natural hazards and the community profile, and where they intersected was risk. And when we're thinking about that, we're looking at probability, like how likely it is to have these hazards occur, what their impact would be, the spatial extent. Remember, I explained some hazards, for instance, like our winter storms, this is sort of an atmospheric hazard. It's going to impact a whole area, whereas flooding is going to be in a smaller area. The amount of warning time that you have for these things to occur, the duration of the hazard, and then we come up with a value. There's a whole formula here, and then we put them into these buckets. And the reason that we do it, besides the fact that, okay, I'm moving it along here. The reason that we do it is that we want to make sure that when you mitigate your risk, you're putting your energy to your highest risk hazard. So I don't want you to get concerned with, well, should we put tornadoes above invasive species, or maybe we should flip them the other way? Like, it really doesn't make any difference. The idea is to get a big picture and get a sense of, like, okay, here are the highest priority, whereas like you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time and energy mitigating the earthquake risk compared to wildfire risk, for instance. And go ahead, Jim.
I don't understand the numbers. Is there a scale that you're using?
Yes, and it's in the plan. We call it a priority risk index, and there's a formula. So I haven't broken it out to show you that formula, but it is in the plan, and so you will see how we came up with this.
Yeah, but it should be on any graphic, clear as day. And is hazardous ranking, and okay, so I think that you probably mean the probability of flooding and from precipitation and dam is 4, and 4 would probably be the highest probability.
Yes, 4 is the highest number.
Yeah, so
right.
You just have to explain that on this piece of paper.
Okay, that's good information for me. I'll do that. I'll do a better job of that next time. All right, I'm going to keep us going. So we look at what contributes to risk, and we want to consider changes in population. And so we've consider the fact that Hardwick has a growing elderly population, and the number of people living below the poverty line has also increased. And then we also want to consider any changes in land use, not only what has happened in the last 5 years, but what we think is going to happen moving forward, and things for you all to consider. So if you have new development, that can increase flooding because you're going to have more impervious surfaces, right? So, anytime you pour concrete, you can increase flooding. You're increasing, new development would increase demand for limited water resources, and the heat island impacts, if trees are removed, is something to consider as well. So this is all pointed out in the plan. And for all of the hazards, we look at what we call problems or impacts, and we come up with a list of problems. And I made just a short list for you as some examples. And I won't read them all to you, but for instance, wind can cause trees to fall onto structures and infrastructure and on roadways. So, for instance, if high winds are the problem, the solution or the mitigation action may be to trim those trees, right? So it's that kind of thing. We're trying to make sure that we sort of have the plan flow together and make logical sense in how we're going from the hazards to the actions. All right. I'm going to keep us going just for time. So these are your goal statements. We put them into categories that you can see there in the colors. We always put saving lives and property first. We do have mitigating risk to your infrastructure and critical facilities there. Increasing the town's capacity to mitigate risk is essential. Protecting your natural resources, and then of course educating all stakeholders, whether that be town employees or residents or business owners. All right. And then your mitigation strategy, and I told you this is kind of the key part of the plan, and those mitigation actions, those are going to be these projects that hopefully will reduce your current or future vulnerabilities to risk. We look to your current impacts as well as we look to what's going to happen in the future. All right, so we put it all together in this way. We take the list of hazards in the 3 buckets. We look at problems, and the problems can be to people, to your structures, to sort of systems of how the town functions, to your natural or historic resources, and to any activities. That could be like you have a town fair every year, that kind of thing. And then we start thinking about mitigation actions, what you're going to do about it. And there are 4 categories for mitigation actions. And these are the 4. Local plans and regulations. This would be things like zoning regulations, so you're not building in high hazard areas, for instance. Your structure and infrastructure projects, that could be like a culvert replacement. Natural systems protection, this could be preventing erosion or something. And then education and awareness is fairly self-explanatory. So when we look to your problems, we look for solutions in these 4 categories. You guys are with me?
Yep.
All right, we're almost done. So this is just an example of some of the mitigation actions that are in your plan. Your previous plan had about 30 plus actions. Your MVP plan, that municipal vulnerability preparedness plan, had about 30 something actions. Your new mitigation plan is going to have I believe 19, 20 mitigation actions. So we tried to kind of consolidate. You're a small town, don't take on more than you can handle. And this is just an example of what you have in your plan now. So you can see protecting open space, designating that heating and cooling center and making sure, obviously, that it can have air conditioning, developing a culvert replacement plan, reducing erosion behind beaver dams and tracking beaver activity, creating a tree removal and maintenance program, developing a health department public education program for infectious disease, and developing the town's website. And so this is just an example of what's going to be in your new plan. All right. Now, when you get, if you choose to look at the plan, and it'll be available to you probably by the middle of March. 7 chapters, it'll be a couple hundred pages. A lot of the content in there is written for FEMA. It really spells out to FEMA, here's the requirement they're looking for, here's the information, because the idea is to get them to approve the plan so you're eligible for funding. I think I've given you a pretty good understanding of what's in all of these chapters. Those mitigation actions, that strategy is chapter 6. So that's where you'll see all of those really detailed actions included, and each one includes an approximate cost, who from the town is going to be responsible for implementing the action, the timeline, some examples of where funding can be accessed, etc. So the longest chapter will definitely be the risk assessment. I think it's around 100 pages now. But hopefully having this will give you a sense of sort of how to look through it and get a sense of what's interesting to you. All right. And I just wanted to show you one slide. I kind of threw this together just for personal preparedness because it's important. And I think when you start talking about a town mitigating risk, you should also consider how you can personally be prepared or mitigate risk to your own property or what have you. So one of the first things to do, if you haven't already, is sign up for Code Red. And that's that, residents can read the whole document. Code Red, this is on your website. If you go to hardwickma.gov, you can sign up for Code Red, and that's how the town can send an alert. If a heating or cooling center is open, I'm sure that's a way that they'll let you know. I think people frequently are confused. Is it a watch or is it a warning? What does that mean? I like the ready.gov website. There's a lot of good information on there. And then 2 things that you can do just on your own is put together emergency kits and have some kind of emergency plan. And it can be basic. Like when my kids are little, I told them if there's a fire, get out of the house, go to the mailbox. Wait there. A first responder will find you there. Don't go wandering off wherever. Like little things, but it can make a world of difference. So, I don't know, it's sort of my public service address, I guess. All right. And that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. You can spend a couple minutes on questions. Go ahead, Judith.
How does this dovetail with the EPA's HERA health environmental risk assessment process, a big process that talks to risk? I just learned about it, and there are grants for it, and I think it's going to be under the Inflation Reduction Act and all that stuff. So
I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah, it's on risk management from the feds.
Okay, I'll check it out.
I don't know if it's duplicative or how we can make them both work together for our advantage at the local level.
I don't know. I'll have to look at what it is. When we create your plan, one of the things we do is look at all the other plans that the town has. And then as we come up with projects with you, we look for many different grant sources, not just to FEMA. So I'm always looking for more grant sources. Anybody else with a question or a comment? All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful. That's my email. So if you want to send a note, you're welcome to. If you didn't put your name into the chat, please do before we get off. And if you want a copy of this, if you put your email address in the chat, I will send a copy to you. Otherwise, Eric's got copies that he can always send out or post. And we did record the session. So tomorrow, Eric, I'll send you and Sandy a copy of the recording.
Thank you. I'll be giving you a call. I appreciate you doing this. Get the word out. It's great.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure. Anybody else with question? All right. Well, have a good evening, you guys, and thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take it easy, Jamie.
I will talk to you tomorrow.